Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly in-depth ag forecast for Ag Carolina Farm Credit and AgSouth Farm Credit. So as we pour through this forecast, I want to give you plenty of things to be thinking about over this Memorial Day weekend. And we're going to start off with a bit of assessment about drought. We're then going to move into what's been really controlling this pattern, both in the Pacific and the Atlantic. We're going to talk about some of the new long-range information that's come out, give you a quick model summary between all of those, and tell you that the number one spot I want you to be keeping an eye on right now is Mexico. So I want to build that story. I want to talk about 2020 as an analog year. And to finish up, I want to give you a bit of information, more information, I guess I should say, about the 2024 hurricane season. So you've been staring at the drought monitor. This is now down to 12% of the U.S. in some form of drought. And it's pretty amazing just to see how much of this has been reduced. And of course, now we have very limited areas throughout the AgSouth and Ag Carolina territory that is in any sort of drought. Now, there's something I want you to think about with this. And what I want you to see here is, where is the drought? If you notice, I know this cuts off here right along the Rio Grande, right? But into Mexico, we're very dry. And way up north here, we're really dry. And into Florida, it's been extremely hot and dry. And I bring this up simply because the pattern that we've been in, I think, is advertising what we might see for early summer. So let's make that case. Over the last, month to date, so over the last 3+ weeks, we've been able to get quite a bit of precipitation into the southeast. And what's interesting about this is that was made, in other words, we were able to get that moisture in place. We were able to make that in this region while still keeping things wet in the Midwest. And I want to make a point about this because typically when we get really wet Midwest springs, like as you can see up here in Iowa, it normally takes a big dominant southeast ridge to make that happen. And you know that we've always got concerns every summer about the presence of a southeast ridge. So we're going to ask, do we see anything like that coming in the pattern? Because it would completely upset what you've got right here. Now, I do have drier weather coming to the Gulf Coast, including southern Georgia, where we have these 3 climate reporting districts having their wettest, second wettest, and third wettest Mays on record through this point. I've got some drier conditions coming in, but not dry, just drier conditions coming in. So if we think about it in a couple other ways, this is the last 30 days as a percent of normal in terms of precipitation, and very few areas in the AgSouth and Ag Carolina area are below 90%. Most areas are between 90 and 150 to 200% of normal precip, with much higher amounts the farther south you go. Take a look at this. This is just the last 2 weeks alone. Now, in addition to just a tremendous amount of rainfall that has gotten through this area, where some places have seen 3 to 10 times the normal rainfall, we've had quite a bit of severe weather that's come through here as well. But before we get to that, I just want to come back and stress a few of these other areas that have been showing up quite dry in the pattern as of late. And you can see them. They're in the dark reds here. And what we want to make a case for is how important those areas are to establishing our early summer pattern. Now, lately, just here over the last 3 days or so, we've had some isolated and locally heavy rainfall. And this was through Thursday night, just looking at where some of those bigger storms were kind of erupting in the midsection of the country. We have seen a lot of severe weather in the Carolinas, but honestly, when you look across the whole of the country, it's been a large region that's experienced much above average severe weather. And we're going to hit that again in just a few minutes. But taking a look at where these flooding rains have been coming through this area, take note that the 100-centimeter soil moisture values are extremely high in the upper Midwest. They're high from eastern Texas all the way across the south into the southeast and up into the Carolinas, where we've recently had such heavy rainfall. And some of the concern has been in the shift of crop type that we've seen down here into parts of Georgia, just as one area as an example. But to the Midwest, if you're a corn and soybean grower that are in the southeast, understand that the Midwest is having some early season issues with too much rainfall, delays in planting, and a tremendous amount of severe weather as well. One thing to point out, I keep mentioning this severe weather. I'm going to show you this again. This is where we currently stand on severe weather reports through this point in May. And some of these numbers are just ridiculous. I mean, 871 tornadoes is more than 130% of average. We've got 4,713 wind reports. That's like 150, 160% of average. And we're above average about 107% on severe hail now at 2,689 reports. And as of late, just take a look, especially right here along the North and South Carolina border, just the intensity of the dots representing the different severe weather types. So we want to know, is this going to slow down? We want to understand who this severe weather has been affecting. And I'll just show you this. This satellite animation is going to tell us a lot. Now, as we play through Thursday, just watch. We had some isolated deep convection. Here it is. This is what gave us that rain you just saw on the 72-hour map. But watch the middle part of the country, honestly. As we saw these huge storms unzip their way into parts of Nebraska, getting into South Dakota, even up in Minnesota. And then the large storm clusters that were down here in Texas hitting the same areas over and over again. We had some deeper storms in parts of North Carolina, some in northern Georgia and South Carolina. But what I want you to see when I stop it here as the sun was setting is the smoke. We had wildfire smoke that was coming from Mexico, Arizona, New Mexico. So much of what's in the Gulf of Mexico pulling into the middle part of the country here is all representative of how dry things are in Mexico. And as I told you at the onset of this video, that is top of mind for me. And I want to make a case for that as we kind of walk through this. Now, first of all, as we look through the beginning of this weekend with respect to where we expect to get more smoke from, this is a forecast for the next 49 hours, just looking at vertically integrated smoke. And while we do see these events in throughout the west and down in the southwest, the majority of the smoke is coming from Mexico. And we've got to pay very, very close attention to that smoke. Now let's make a case for this and start to see where this overall pattern is going to go and why I'm so concerned about Mexico, all right? What you've got here is your current ocean temperature graphics. We have talked at length about La Nina coming back. The trade winds have resumed their normal behavior and in fact have been stronger. But here's the other components to this. The cooler water that's riding through here is a part of what we call the negative PMM. The cooler water that surrounds it is part of the negative PDO. But see this warmer water inching its way in here? If you look at the combination of these events, the warm water here, the cool water off the Baja, and La Nina, this has allowed the jet stream to come screaming in through this area. It's been able to dive south into the west. But do you see the cooler water that's in place right here? With the very warm Atlantic water to the south of it. We're going to talk about that and what that means for this hurricane season in a few moments. But this means that it's going to be very difficult to block the atmosphere up on the eastern side of the country, while it's nearly impossible to block it up on the western side. And the flow has just gone across the country with no persistent large southeast ridges. We're always going to question in every video for the next 6 months if a southeast ridge is going to come into play. Because the moment it does, it's going to bring heat, it's going to bring risk of flash drought, so we're going to keep an eye out on it. Now what I'm talking about here is the lack of one. And you see, since the beginning of May, you don't see these bright red colors over the southeast. What do we see? These are all ridges of high pressure. Here, there's another one there. Sorry, let me close that H. There's another one here, there, over parts of Scandinavia. But it's the upstream one right here that's most compelling. Because to the south of this trough, the air's been screaming, diving into the western United States and running out across the rest of the country. In 2019, when something like this happened, there was also a large southeastern ridge, which is not there this year, which is why we've been able to get the moisture for the last 6 weeks into the southeast, breaking the drought that had started to develop in Virginia and North Carolina, and really just dumping in at times extremely heavy rainfall. You see, the importance of that cool water that's in the North Atlantic as well is what's giving us this. You see, this is a map where the warm colors represent faster than normal westerly winds, okay? And the blue colors represent slower than normal westerly winds, or even at times easterly winds. Now, what am I talking about? Here is the really strong flow that's come in from the Aleutian Islands through the Gulf of Alaska. This is the subtropical flow. And here is the result of having that warmer water to the south and cooler water to the north. There's no big, large blue blob here. Now, this is not a map of troughs and ridges. This is just wind speed compared to average. And if it was blue in this area, that would mean we have more meridional or north-south flow. And we just don't have that. So this is what's kept the pattern progressive and going. Now, there's some change in it in the near term. We're going to talk about that in a second. But what I'm interested in understanding is where this pattern originated. And there's some connections with it in the tropics, specifically with, well, this, where the MJO has been. And the fact that there's been kind of this inverse to the rising motion here with sinking motion in this area, which has helped promote the continuation of drought. And with rising motion happening here, we're kind of putting a little bit of extra heat and momentum into the flow of the atmosphere. It's helped the subtropical jet, it's helped the polar jet, and that's just kept things going while Mexico has continued to get hotter and drier. I mean, take a look at our latest satellite-based root zone soil moisture indicator map. Again, it shows how dry things have been in Central America through Mexico, getting into the along the Great Divide, and then up into Western Canada. You see, I bring this up because of one thing. If there's moisture in the soil and moisture in the vegetation, did you know that more than half of the sun's energy that strikes the leaf surface or the ground surface has to go into evaporating the water first? If you don't have that water in place, if there's no moisture in the soil or in the leaves, that heat goes into the ground and is sensibly put back into the lower atmosphere. We call it a sensible heat flux versus a latent heat flux, which comes from the conversion of liquid water to vapor. My point is to say that all of this dryness in this area means that more of the sun's energy is going in to heat things up, which is why we've had these heat advisories around the Rio Grande River. Whereas over the southeast, we've continued to stay with above average precipitation and honestly quite muggy at times, even though there's some smoke filling in the air from the Mexico wildfires. Now, to show you how dry it's been, this is the North American Drought Monitor. It's released in the middle of each month, which is why you still see parts of North Carolina on the drier side of the spectrum. That's gone now because this is, again, made in the middle of the month, and it's been the recent rains that have knocked that out. But they've not done anything to change this. And why I want you to be thinking about this is one simple reason. If we start building in heat into this area more than average, which we've seen lately, you start to get this positive feedback where the pressure begins to build, the atmosphere becomes capped, and high pressure starts to fill in. And storms tend to run the periphery of that. And the big idea here is that it is very, very unlikely that you can have large ridging events over New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and Mexico, and simultaneously have them over the southeast. So what's that mean? That means that if we see the presence of southwest ridging taking hold in early summer, we stay hot, but we stay stormy. And we have very low risk of drought development. That's the case I'm trying to build for you today. So watch this. This is an animation of the upper level heights from the Artificial Intelligence Forecasting System. As we play it forward, deep troughs continue to just roll through the Gulf of Alaska. They move across the northern tier of the U.S. This one's actually going to deliver some cooler weather to us next week, but it's just a setup here that's favoring these ridges that like to rebuild right here along the Great Divide or in the Western Plains. And the flow gets going something like this. And as this builds into this region, yes, we will see a little bit of drier weather along the Gulf Coast. I'm just telling you, though, the longer-term implications of this pattern are to reinforce as we move into the summer weather regime, which is coming up very soon, more ridging in the southern plains. And if we get ridging here, it's going to change up our chances of having drought develop in the southeast as we go into summer. And that's what I'm going to show you in a few minutes, a 4-model comparison right here in just a few moments. So given what I just showed you, though, let's take a look at what we're dealing with here on Friday. Large area from my home state of Illinois all the way down to Texas with the risk of severe storms. We have storms here on a lingering front in parts of the AgSouth and Ag Carolina territory. As we get into the day on Saturday, again, that front lingers. We're going to watch for isolated storms, some of which could be severe going into the weekend, but the bigger risk is back in the southern plains. And even as we get into Sunday, we're going to watch the Mid-South again have the risk of severe storms. We're going to watch to see if this translates into the southeast. So from there, let's go have a look at some of our high-resolution models beginning early in the morning on Friday. Just take note that throughout Friday afternoon and evening, storms are going to pop. We're at that time of year where there's this daily chance, as long as there's no big southeast ridge, we're in this daily chance of getting convective events, thunderstorms building in the afternoon. The main frontal boundary sweeps right here through parts of the Midwest all the way down in toward the Red River Valley of the South. That's going to be where we have our greatest severe weather threat on Friday. Playing into Saturday, again, more isolated storms on the lingering front that's still sitting in this area. That's through Saturday morning. getting into Saturday midday. Again, watch out for those storms. They're going to be there. We can't predict them with these models, but we know the atmosphere is conducive to creating those storms. And as we work our way into Saturday, we're going to reset up the midsection of the country here on Saturday into Sunday for more severe weather over the Mid-South. Now from there, I want to give you a multi-model forecast. And in each of these models, you're going to see the same thing. There's a wet corridor here, here, and here. We're going to be a bit drier in parts of the southeast with this pattern. So that's the artificial intelligence forecasting system. Let's play it out there and look at the NBM. Can you see it? 1, 2, 3. If we go from the NBM, which is called the National Blended Models, to the WPC, the Weather Prediction Center models, 1, 2, 3. So again, it's this area that shows up a little bit drier forecast. Let's now go look at the European. 1, 2, 3. And then finally, let's go look at the GFS. Very overall similar look. It's not completely dry, but it's isolated. It's daily events coming off of the sea breeze. It is these thunderstorms that just pop on the heat of the day and the fact that there is moisture in place and nothing to cap it. You will get storms out of this, but you're not going to find the models being overly aggressive on your rainfall totals. It'll be one of those scenarios that when you're underneath that one individual cluster of storms that pops up, yeah, you can get some heavy rains, even some small hail and some wind damage, but surrounding communities may completely miss out on this. It's these three corridors, 1, 2, 3, that over the next 10 days have the highest probability of picking up more than an inch. In the Ag Carolina territory, though, take note that the closer you get to the Gulf Coast, the East Coast, you have a better chance of seeing, about an inch of rain in the next 10 days. Again, a lot of isolated convection out of this. Now, the models don't handle this very well, but I'm going to show them to you anyway. GFS left, European right. Now, we've already seen through Friday into Saturday. Let's get into the weekend where this low barrels through on Sunday, comes out of the Mid-South, through the Ohio River Valley, up into the Eastern Great Lakes. It's in both models. That's one that swipes a front through us on Monday afternoon and evening. We'll be on the lookout for isolated severe storms in that particular case, and that front clears. Once we get into next Tuesday, Wednesday, this is when the atmosphere is dipping into this kind of trough in the west, ridge in the middle part of the country, still a trough over the east. So storms kind of fire up in this area. Next, watch this again. It's kind of next Wednesday, Thursday. But they're going to work their way over toward us once we get later in the week next week. So again, you notice here I don't have just persistent everyday kind of rainfall chances like we've seen in the last few weeks, but it's not as though the chances are nothing as we go forward. So from there, let's go talk about the week 2 forecast. You can see that in the May 31st to June 6th outlook, the CPC is a little drier, the ECMWF is a little drier, and the GFS is the driest of the three models. Main reason for that is because the GFS has a known dry bias for the southeast. But it's the pattern that I want you to think about. It's something that, let's try that again. It's something that comes in like this, and therefore we're going to have some flow out of the northwest, which initially is a bit drier for our area, while storms try to bubble under the heat of this ridge, getting back into the plains. So that seems to be what the week 2 pattern is going to be. So again, what is my point? Overall, we're drier than we have been. And we could withstand a week or two of being a bit drier than normal. That's not going to be a problem for a lot of us. There are some spots that are struggling, but overall, that's why we started off looking at the precipitation. I mean, this is what May has been. So overall, we could use a little bit of a drier signal as we kind of play forward with this. All right, let's go on from there and let's talk a bit about, let's see here, we covered this. We looked at the week 2. Let's talk temperatures. On Friday, a lot of mid-80s for our region, mid to upper 80s. We see the greatest heat is in Texas, getting up to the Central Plains on Saturday as we start to crack 90s throughout this part of the southeast. Sunday, another warm one, getting into Monday. Memorial Day, still quite warm. But here's some of that cooler air that starts to show up by Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. See this? So this is when that pattern's got a bit of flow to it, looking something like that. And what we see beyond that is this is the next 5 days. This is getting out there day 5 through 10 when that cooler air tries to come back in. So this is just cracking us back down there towards seasonal. And as we play forward, getting all the way out there now to the first week of June, it's all about where this heat's going to go. Now let's get back into that longer term discussion. Watch this. This is the European model weekly forecast from now through the 4th of July. It's a 1-week sliding window. And to start off with that first week of June, we see the cooler air that's going to be in place. Really, it's going to be more seasonal than cool. We then play forward. Watch where the heat comes in. It's in the Central Plains. It's in the Southwest. We may start to get a bit hotter down here, but overall, the greatest risk of heat is somewhere in this vicinity. And the models are showing quite a bit of June heat pouring in. Now, what are they doing in terms of precipitation? Well, this is where things get a little bit hairy. The new longer range European model does not have any sort of major dryness forecast for the southeast. Why? No big ridge. No ridge setting up there. But the question becomes, does the ridge become established in this area? Meaning that even though this is showing up dry, we're going to get these ridge riding storms that come over the top of this, which could be critical to the moisture returning to those areas. Remember, those storms finish in the southeast once they get cranking over a big dome of heat in Texas. That seems to be maybe where this pattern's going. And there's some support for that. I mean, just take a look at what the MJO has done. It's come out now into phase 4. We expected in early June to sweep into phases 5 and 6. Phase 4 is where we've been. That's why the next 7 days is so active. But when you get into phases 5 in June, there's ridging here, like we just talked about. Remember that? That flow doing this. That's where that heat comes into the southern plains of the United States. And even phase 6 continues to support that as we get later into the month of June. Now, I bring you through all of that discussion to get you here. This is the June forecast put out by the Climate Prediction Center. And again, see where the greatest risk of heat is? It's building out of Mexico into Texas and into the Four Corner states. And that's where the drought seems to be building in their forecast models as well. They've got us hot and stormy for the summer time period here, June, July, and August. What do we have from the European model? Again, overall, stormy and hot. What about going into the NMME, the National Multi-Model Ensemble? Stormy and hot. And finally, this would be the forecast from the IRI Multi-Model Probability Forecast Group. While it's got the greatest heat and drought risk that's in the Four Corner states, the Great Divide, running up through the Western Mountains, it's got us hotter than average and stormy. No sense of drought building into the southeast. No model right now is giving us a clue that there's going to be some big southeast ridge. Now, I want to add one more dimension to this, and I want to show you, again, our current ocean temperatures and compare them to a year that I find to be a strong analog, which is 2020 in May. So take note, both years had this developing La Nina, a little cooler water here, the negative PMM, the warm water pushing into this part of the Gulf of Alaska. See it? This is this year, and this is 2020. No, it's not a perfect match, but it seems as though summer's progressing toward a 2020-like look, which overall, I don't think the temperatures are going to match. I think we're going to be warmer than this, but I think the precipitation pattern could be it. We could be on the hot and stormy side of things rather than the hot and dry. Now, the moment I get any sense that that's not right and it's going to change, we're going to talk. I will not, I'll let you know if I have any doubt in that being the forecast going forward. But that's 4 different models plus an analog year that seems to make a lot of sense going forward. And that same analog year also matches up with our new forecast from the National Hurricane Center looking at this upcoming hurricane season. This is the most aggressive early season hurricane outlook they've made at an 85% chance of being above normal. That's 17 to 25 named systems, 8 to 13 hurricanes, and 4 to 7 major hurricanes. And by the way, the National Hurricane Center, NHC, you got to go visit this website. It's a good one. They had out earlier today, let's see if it's still there now, they took it out. They did have a chance for some tropical development here. What I want to tell you is, I think even in June we're going to get to see our first named system this year, as the MJO likely sends as it moves over into phase 8 and 1, what we call a CCKW. Okay, so this is a convectively coupled Kelvin wave. That's nerd speak for increasing the risk of getting tropical systems early in the season based off the movement on the MJO. Okay, I'll worry about it and tell you about it when it happens, but I want to keep you aware that we could see some early season activity in June already. But my point is to tell you that this forecast from NOAA is the most aggressive I think they've made in preseason, so a May forecast. If you want more information about this, go to one of my favorite websites. It's called Tropical Tidbits. If you go to Tropical Tidbits, right at the front page, you will have access to Dr. Levi Cowan's report on his projections for the 2024 hurricane season. Just click right here and you can watch it. I think it's fantastic. We're going to finish this up with a little bit of an international outlook, and I'm going to get you right here to this 10-day update. Couple of things. Russian wheat belt showing up drier continually. Flooding in southern Brazil. Some better rains on the southern safrinha crop in Brazil, but we're drier a bit farther to the north. It's actually quite cold through Argentina right now as well. Very wet coming out of the Bay of Bengal over into parts of Southeast Asia. Flooding continuing on the Yangtze River and south of it. And then as you take note, the Manchurian plain, the North China plain, which you do grow competing crops with, is looking wetter as well. Parts of Australia continue to struggle with drought conditions, especially Western Australia and South Australia. We're going to continue to keep an eye on their winter to see if it shows up as any sort of an international problem going forward into their spring and our fall. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up and tell you have a great Memorial Day weekend, and I'll talk to you next Friday. Thanks.